You know that shimmering patch of water you see on a hot road? The one that just vanishes when you get closer? Or maybe you've seen those incredible photos of floating cities and castles in the middle of a desert. We call it a mirage. But what if it's more than just a trick of the light? Let's dive into what our source material has to say about this, because it's a wild ride.
The source material we're digging into today describes seeing a mirage as being like a fairyland. And it makes you wonder, what if that's not just a poetic description? What if it's literal? Today we're going to look at two completely different ways to explain this amazing phenomenon.
So here's the plan. We'll start with the mirage, as that illusion we're all kind of familiar with, and we'll break down the science behind it. But then we're going to hit the brakes and pivot to some really sharp questions our source author raises. And those questions, they're going to lead us to a totally different theory they've come up with, a peek into a place they call Elysium. We'll even look at some bizarre stories of lost time they use as evidence. And we'll wrap it all up by asking, what do we really see?
All right, so Section 1. Is the mirage just a familiar illusion? I mean, we all know the classic images, right? Travelers in the desert seeing an oasis that isn't really there, or sailors spotting phantom ships on the horizon. It's often called this beautiful and illusory scenery in the sky, which kind of makes you wonder, what is it exactly, and where on earth does it come from?
That brings us straight to Section 2 and the conventional view, how science explains the whole scene. This is probably the explanation most of us heard back in school. It's all grounded in physics, specifically the way light and air behave.
The absolute core of the scientific principle here is something called light refraction. All that means is that light bends when it moves through stuff with different densities. You've seen this a million times. Think about how a straw looks bent in a glass of water. Well, science says the exact same thing happens with layers of air that are at different temperatures.
Okay, so this slide breaks it down pretty simply. First, the sun just bakes the sand. That makes the air right above the ground super hot and way less dense than the cooler air sitting on top of it. Then, light from something far away, like the blue sky, travels down, and as it hits that layer of hot air, it actually bends back up. It's a cool effect called total internal reflection. It basically acts like a mirror on the ground. Finally, that bent light travels to your eye. And your brain, which is wired to think light always travels in a straight line, just assumes it's seeing a reflection on the ground. The result? You see a shimmering pool of water that's really just a picture of the sky.
But this is exactly where our source author hits the pause button on that whole story. For Section 3, we're going to look a little closer at the standard explanation by asking some pretty tough questions.
First question up. If a mirage is just a reflection of some distant landscape, the author asks, well, how far away is distant? And more importantly, has anyone ever actually found the original? Like, when people see a detailed mirage of a whole city, have scientists ever been able to point to a map and say, aha, that's a reflection of this specific city right here? The source suggests that this key piece of evidence is, well, usually missing.
Okay, next problem, orientation. The physics of light bending should give us a predictable result, right? The image should be either upright or inverted, one or the other. So why, the author asks, are some mirages seen right side up, while others are completely upside down? That inconsistency seems to throw a wrench in a simple one-size-fits-all explanation.
And here's a really big one. The conditions for a mirage, layers of air at different temperatures, are incredibly common. They happen over roads, deserts, and oceans literally all the time. So the source asks, if the ingredients are always there, why are mirages themselves so rare? Shouldn't we be seeing them constantly?
The source brings up a great example, the Penglai Peninsula in China, which is famous for its mirages. Now, if a unique local environment is the cause, why does the scene in the mirage look different almost every time it shows up? You'd think a consistent set of conditions would produce a pretty consistent image, right? So, with all these questions poking holes in the scientific view, the author in our source material presents a radically different idea. This is Section 4, where we dive into their alternate theory, that a mirage is a glimpse of a world they call Elysium. This slide just lays it out perfectly. On one side, you have the scientific theory. A mirage is a reflection of our world. But on the other, you have the author's theory. It's an emergence from another world. So we're shifting from thinking of this as an optical illusion to the possibility of it being a window into another dimension. So what exactly is this Elysium world? Well, according to the source, it's not an illusion at all. It's described as a real, tangible dimension, one of 36 in fact, that exists right alongside our own.
In this view, a mirage is a literal, brief moment where this other place kind of breaks through into our world for us to see.
Okay, the obvious question, right? If this world is real and it's all around us, why can't we see it all the time? Well, the author gives a couple of reasons. One is just biology. Our eyes simply aren't built for it, the same way we can't see ultraviolet or infrared light. The source even claims we only perceive less than 3% of the reality around us. But it also gives a more spiritual reason, that our merits and virtues just haven't reached the standard required to be able to see it.
Now for section 5. To back up this really big idea, the author doesn't turn to physics. Instead, they turn to these strange historical stories, anecdotes about lost time that just seem to defy our normal understanding of how things work.
To make sense of these stories, the author introduces their own idea about two different kinds of time. They call our everyday one foot in front of the other time longitudinal time. It flows in a straight line. But then they propose something called latitudinal time for this non-material world, a place where time can stretch or shrink or just pass at a totally different speed.
The source gives us 3 stories as possible evidence. There's the legend of a whole Turkish army that supposedly vanished into a cloud in 1915. There's a story about an Italian plane in 1994 that allegedly disappeared for 20 minutes, and when it came back, every watch on board was exactly 20 minutes slow. And then there's the ancient folktale of a woodcutter. The author's theory is that in each of these cases, the people involved briefly slipped into this other kind of time.
The woodcutter story is the perfect example of this idea. He's just in his normal forest, but he gets a little lost. He stops to watch 2 old men play a game of chess for what feels like just a little while. When he turns to go home down a path he knows, he finds that centuries have passed. His village is totally different, his family, everyone he knew, long gone. For him, it was just a few minutes. For the rest of the world, it was generations. The source says this is what happens when you step into the Elysium world.
All right, let's wrap this up with our final section and look at the author's ultimate conclusion about what we're really seeing when a mirage appears.
The source argues that a mirage isn't some random accident of physics. Instead, it proposes that it's a message, and it's on purpose. The author writes that it's, quote, a deliberate arrangement to indicate to humanity that your sky is not illusory, but another time and space, another world.
So, the huge takeaway from this whole perspective is that seeing a mirage isn't about being tricked by an illusion. It's actually presented as a kind of gift. According to the author, you're fortunate. You're being shown that a more beautiful world is out there. It's a sign of hope.
And that leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. Whether you see a mirage as just a trick of the light or a window into another reality, it really forces you to ask, is what we see every day the whole picture? Is our material world the only one there is?